we were working with a client, and the client really wanted to have his kids be the trustee. And he was strongly encouraging we use a corporate trustee, which is what Cornerstone is. And the way he said it, he said, "I have never seen a sibling relationship improve when one of the siblings is a trustee over the other sibling's money."
Kids need money from age 25 to 40 because that's when real life happens with kids and houses and job changes and whatever else. And so waiting to give people money in their 60s and 70s doesn't add a lot of value. Good day, everyone, and welcome to another podcast from BGM. And today we are circling the wagons on our 360 mindset by talking to Chad Halbur, who is the president of one of our sister companies, Cornerstone Private Asset Trust Company. And with that, we are going to dig into some of the real fun things that people sometimes do, but oftentimes make a mistake at when they do their estate planning. So Chad, I'd like to welcome you to the podcast.
Thanks, John. Look forward to it.
Yeah. Let's start out with just tell me two seconds of who you are, what your role is at a trust company, and how trust companies fit into generally into the estate plan.
Perfect. My name is Chad Halbur. I'm president of Cornerstone. State trust companies tend to be a great partner for families in helping them provide oversight and direction in advance of setting up trusts and estate planning, and then at the time of administration of estate planning. So there's some real value that we can bring to the table when it comes to helping families understand what the moving pieces are in advance, and then also at estate settlement time, and then also to be able to honor your intent and wishes as the person who passes this money or resources on to family or charities.
That's great. And one thing I want to point out is you guys are located out of South Dakota, which is a state level issue. Why don't you, again, give me a few minutes on why South Dakota over other states in the union? That'd be great.
Perfect. Yeah, South Dakota. South Dakota has a lot of favorable trust laws that can provide some meaningful impact and benefit for our families as they look through estate planning and transfer strategies. One of the benefits is South Dakota does not have a state income tax. So there's the ability to not have the trust pay a state income tax if certain circumstances and assets are aligned. South Dakota has some of the best trust decanting language of all the 50 states. So there's some real benefit in being able to have a certain amount of flexibility in being able to modify trust and adjust trust after they've been set up. Asset protection. I think South Dakota ranks number 1 or number 2 in asset protection when it comes to making sure that our beneficiaries have these assets protected and there's no surprises that they get encroached upon by creditors or other scenarios. So those are really the primary things. The last one, I guess, really being dynasty trust provisions. When South Dakota was one of the first states to put in dynasty trust provisions, meaning trust assets could go on in perpetuity. So if we wanted to look at something like a Rockefeller trust or a dynasty trust where someone can have meaningful benefit and legacy for their family for 2, 3, 4, 5, multiple generations, South Dakota can definitely accomplish that for our families.
Good to know. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, and you know this, is that you and I sit around and chat about all the mistakes people make in estate planning, and particularly because everyone seems to think that this is all about, well, the lawyer will write an estate plan, but you and I get to see what happens with the second generation, the third generation, which is kind of where the money dissipates. I don't know the exact stat, but it's something like half the money's gone by generation 2 and all the money's gone by generation 3. Is that about accurate?
Yeah, there's this whole adage of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, meaning, the first generation doesn't have a lot of money and they accumulate money in that first generation. The second generation has seen some struggle, but mostly privilege. And so their expectations of money have changed a little bit from the first generation. And then the third generation, in many scenarios, again, this is stereotyping, but in many scenarios, they haven't seen much struggle. They've only seen opportunity and abundance. And if they don't continue to reinvent their family lines, the businesses, the assets, and the growth, money eventually runs out. And the adage of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations is where this comes from. By the 3rd generation, if you think about it, assets have been divided in multiple ways. If you've got a husband and wife that divide it and they have 3 kids, then that's divided by 3. And then that next generation, generation 3, they have 3 children in that. We now have assets really being divided in a lot of ways. So what was a lot of money for generation 1 has really been distributed out and has been spread out significantly. So if each generation isn't continuing to build on that wealth and grow the assets, it doesn't last forever. So we want to really be intentional in how we look at estate planning and succession planning and making sure our clients understand good strategies that can help them accomplish their goals.
So you bring up something I want to dig into a little bit, which is maybe I'll position this question in 2 different ways. You pick the one you like. What are parents doing wrong as they put together their estate plan? Or said another way, treating children fair and equal is very different. Fair is very different than equal. And maybe that's where parents go wrong. But talk to me a little bit about where parents go wrong as they start to go down this path of creating an estate plan for their kids.
There's so many things to unpack there. Let me just start with the first thing I can think of is fair and equal are really 2 different things. If we look at different scenarios, we have family members who need more help than others in a lot of cases. And that doesn't mean that you don't love them as much if you give less to one and more to another. It really means you're looking at this from a standpoint of need versus equality. And that's okay. The other part that I think is important, and I say this to a lot of my clients, inheritance is not an outright expectation. Inheritance is a gift. So the fact that generation 2 thinks generation 1 should do it exactly the way they would do it, I disagree with completely. Generation 1 grew the money. Generation 1 had accumulated the money. If they want to spend it all during their lifetime, then do it. If they want to share it with charity, then do it. If they want to give it to family, then do it. I'm a big advocate of trust, and estate planning should be a function of goals and objectives. And we really try to build in family values and, what is important to these people when we build trust and create structures to allow these assets to go on for more than one generation past their lifetime. Building off of what do they do wrong? I think there's a couple different approaches, and we can get into family dynamics, and I know you probably have this teed up for later. So family dynamics are a big piece. I'm going to pause on most of that discussion, but what I see is some families are more open about conversation about money and resources and how money can be a tool, and others are very private about it. There isn't a right or wrong answer, but what I've found is those families that communicate more openly about money and how money is a tool and not just to be accumulated only, but also how it can be used for good and how it can be used to better their family members, tend to build better plans. And when they build better plans, it comes in the form of a variety of ways. One, first of all, you got to start somewhere. So the first and most important thing is get a plan done. 99% of the plans that you're going to build are not irrevocable. They have the ability to be changed. They have the ability to be modified. So get a plan in place, understand how that plan works, identify what you like and don't like about that plan. And this goes back to revisiting the plan every 3 to 5 years or 5 to 8 years. Identify what you want to see changed. So as we look at these plans, families that really do this well are incredibly intentional and have spent multiple iterations of their estate plan, whether it's they've literally changed the plan 2 or 3 times, or whether they've just chicken scratched it on paper how they want to see the change, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times. Being intentional about it really has a meaningful impact in what the outcome is. And then the second piece is by having these conversations and reviewing it with some regularity, it's really important because you grow in your knowledge. As you grow in your knowledge of what it can look like, you're able to look at being more sophisticated and more intentional with how the plan lays out. And I have always found that when you do that, you can get a better result for your family because it becomes what you want, not what the lawyer drafted as standard legal documents.
I think one thing that you and I would agree on when you do family meetings is communication's the key, because more often than not, parents are not getting their kids in the room in advance of doing estate planning. They just assume they know what the kids want, and half the time the kids don't want something. Like, perfect example, kids don't always want the family cabin. The parents anguish over who gets the family cabin. I don't know if you agree with that, but
I do agree with that. And I think just having conversations about some of the unique assets, as you said, having conversations about what the money can do and how they can use it, I think is really important. What we see oftentimes is children. Well, let me say this. I think family meetings are really important, and I strongly encourage it for all of our clients for a couple of reasons. One, I think it allows you to align with the family, generation one, generation two. Most generation one parents are willing to be flexible in the outcome if they really understand what generation two wants and how they would use it. Now, there are some that wouldn't use it the way they would want to. And we have to be strong in that position and make sure that we're getting what generation one or the grantors want to see happen. So I think that's important. The second thing is, and I found this really interesting, generation two, especially as generation two gets into their 50s and 60s, they're starting to think about this for themselves. They're starting to see their 70 and 80-year-old parents' health decline. They're starting to see their abilities day-to-day decline, and they're worried about their parents. They don't necessarily want to pry and know all the details or know the numbers or know, all the specifics per se. But what they do want is they want to know their parents have a plan. They want to know their parents have a plan that is intentional for them, that is well thought out, and can be executed without a lot of problems. Because what happens is, in a lot of cases, generation two is going to have to come in and help clean up some of this, or help organize some of this, or help clear out the house or some of the family possessions. And, a lot of times they're busy with their own lives. So it's something where I think that communication is really important.
So you touch on something that I wanted to touch on, which is, quite honestly, picking the wrong trustee. Oftentimes, I think families name one of the children as trustee, and the reality is that child might be smart. They might be a doctor, but how many doctors have time in their day to stop and deal with settling an estate? So just talk a little bit about what picking the wrong trustee looks like, and what are some of the options out there that people could do to kind of alleviate that problem?
Yeah, I've seen some really interesting strategies on how they choose a trustee. One is the oldest child. One is the oldest male. And again, sometimes this is a little stereotypical, but that's what we see. And then we see someone who has a successful profession, like you said, doctor, lawyer, or something, financial person who they think would understand this best. The two things that definitely come to mind is they tend to be the busiest. They tend to not have the time and ability to do this. And then the second thing I would say is, and I had another advisor share this story with me. We were working with a client, and the client really wanted to have his kids be the trustee. And he was strongly encouraging we use a corporate trustee, which is what Cornerstone is. And the way he said it, he said, "I have never seen a sibling relationship improve when one of the siblings is a trustee over the other sibling's money." And I think that's the simplest way to say it. Relationships tend to get damaged when someone's making financial decisions on your behalf because it's assumed they're smarter, they're the chosen one. Whatever child two feels in his head, there's so much family dynamics that come into this, you don't want to add more. And I've heard it said, he was always the favorite child, that's why he's the trustee. He was the one who always got special treatment, that's why he's the trustee. And all of those emotional components absolutely come into play when we work with families and when we try to look at estate planning and being strategic with how we do this. So for a lot of our clients, they really value the idea of an independent third party. They value the idea of having someone that can partner with them throughout their lifetime and help them make good decisions so that when it comes time to take over the estate planning, or I'm sorry, the estate settlement and or the distribution of assets, and if any of those assets stay in trust, the oversight and management and administration of the trust, that there's a lot of value in having that relationship. I always say clients are putting a lot of trust in a trustee that they've never met. There are so many clients that will put in big bank company, trust company into their documents because they bank there. Well, if you look at any of the top 3 big banks, they do have trust departments, but those trust departments are typically going to be really good answers for people who have $150, $250 million in assets or up. For someone who's got $5 to $10, $30 million, they're just an account number. There's no relationship there. And what our clients really value in us is that we're building a relationship with them over time, and we're making sure that we're understanding what their goals and values and intentions are. Because a document is nothing more than a black and white document that the trustee gets to interpret. If we don't understand what makes that family tick, what makes that family successful, what values they have, it's really hard to step in the footsteps of a parent and try and facilitate money and values the way they would. So if I can, I'll share a story that really impacted my career. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
So I had a client who set up trust for his 2 kids. And both of these parents, generation 1, were still alive. So they were doing some estate planning, some advanced estate planning, and they wanted their kids, who were probably 18 years old at that point, to have trust set up for them. Those trusts were established. Fast forward 5 or 6 years, some of the kids started wanting to use the money. So one of the children came to me and said, hey, I would like to, my family's growing, I'd like to get a new car that's a little bit bigger for my family. So I was able to talk to the beneficiary, got some information about what he was looking for. He told me he was looking for a Toyota, kind of an SUV, and that he was going to go shopping. So this trust was big enough that, the car purchase wasn't going to be outside of the scope of reasonable. So a few days later, he calls me from the dealership and he says, hey, I found the car. What's the next steps? What do we do? And I said, perfect. Why don't you let me talk to the salesperson? How much is it and what type of car is it? We bought some kind of Toyota, but it was the top line SUV, and it was a $98,000 car. And this was 10 years ago. So, I have this little mini heart attack thinking, oh man, most of my clients are not going to value their 23, 24-year-old kid spending $100,000 on a car. How do I get out of this? How do I work my way through this? So I played it cool, and fortunately the grantor was still alive because he had set these up during life. So I call client and I say, hey, client, just talk to your son. He's looking at getting a new car. He says, yeah, I know. His family's growing. We talked about it. I support the idea of getting him a new car. So I respond, that's great. Did you know that it's a $98,000 car? And he said, without skipping a beat, let him have it. And I said, excuse me? And he said, we're a car family, Chad. He drives my Ferrari, he drives my GTR, he drives my Corvette. That's just who we are. It's kind of things that we find important in our family and things that we spend money on. From that day going forward, I knew that every family has something. It's horses, it's art, it's cabins, it's travel, it's cars, it's something. So our job is, how do we get to the heart of what's important to every family and be able to say yes to the things that most other trust companies will say no to, so that we can continue to support the family values as they sit with that individual family. So understanding who our clients are, what they value, is a big part of making us different and being able to say yes to the right things and no to the other things that we should be saying no to.
So to that point, you brought this up earlier in your comment. You want to be around forever to support the next generation and maybe a third generation. One of the things that's really changed in life is that more and more we're seeing that when money's put into a trust for the next generation, it never comes back out. Part of that's done to protect it from lawsuits and divorces and things like that. But what are things like that? What are trends that you're seeing that have shifted over the last 10 years of your career, even 20 years of your career, where it's like it's different now than it used to be? And where are things, headed in that light?
So a couple of things come to mind. One is I think people are starting to be more flexible with their trust language. Trusts have changed quite a bit in the last 10 years, and here's how I would explain it. In the past, the trusts that I used to see would say outright distributions at age 30, age 40, and age 50. And the idea being that their children would be mature enough and old enough to be able to make good decisions. And by putting a sprinkling system in place, meaning they get some of it at 30, some of it at 40, some of it at 50, they'll learn how to use this money effectively. And what we've seen is that if someone doesn't have a good financial pattern, getting more money and playing with it doesn't necessarily solve it. So they don't necessarily get better when they get more money. The issues tend to become bigger issues. So I have seen that the idea of those outright distributions at specific ages probably aren't the right answer for most families. The second piece is, and I've had clients say this, there isn't a spouse that doesn't understand when the outright distribution is going to happen. So if we're trying to protect these from creditors, the biggest creditors we see, unfortunately, are divorce. And I don't mean it in anything negative, but the truth of the matter is where we see assets distributed and broken up tends to be first and foremost in divorce. And a lot of our families really want to see these assets stay within the family. So when you do an outright distribution at age 30 or 40 or 50, what spouse isn't going to stick around for another year or so, assuming health and healthy relationship or whatever, to get that distribution? So what we're seeing is really that lifetime trusts are becoming more and more popular. What a lifetime trust is it's a trust that stays, the assets stay in trust for the entire life of the beneficiary. That doesn't mean it can't be distributed out. That doesn't mean it can't be fully used up, but it is kind of part of the trust assets for the life of the individual. That has been a big trend. And if you have a friendly trustee, meaning a trustee who's not looking to hold the assets for the benefit of the trust company, but looking to do what's right for the beneficiaries, lifetime trusts are a really smart answer. The second thing, and I'm working on this with another advisor right now, building multi-generational trusts. So giving trust to generation 2, and then setting up trust for generation 3. And then when generation 2 passes, all of those assets roll into generation 3. So we're replenishing the pot at each generation if those assets continue to not be spent down. It creates a lot of opportunities for individual families to make good estate planning decisions on their family line, meaning if they've got a taxable estate already, why would they spend those assets? Why wouldn't they continue to keep them in trust, allow it to pass on to their kids when the time comes, and be able to keep that outside of their taxable estate and from paying estate tax on them? So there's some really interesting ideas right now that they're not new. I'm just seeing them become more popular, more common in planning practices.
So let's pretend you go the other direction towards mom and dad have passed away. Next generation's taking over. What are the surprises that these families have about trust administration, what mom and dad did with the estate plan? What surprises families, positive or negative, quite honestly?
So the first thing that comes to mind is how long an estate plan, an estate settlement takes. We've had clients that say, hey, my parents passed away. You guys are listed as the executor of the estate. They give us information. And then 2 weeks later, they say, why haven't I gotten my distribution yet? So not understanding all of the moving parts is something that we try to educate them on. On the front end, to file an estate tax return, you have 9 months. And then in addition to that, you can get a 6-month extension. And then on top of that, no one's going to distribute 100% of the assets until you get the IRS letter saying that they have accepted the return. So most estates take 18 to 36 months to be fully distributed. And a lot of people don't understand that. And people get frustrated. But the truth of the matter is, we have to make sure we settle all the obligations of all creditors, including the IRS being one of the biggest ones. And they're the least forgiving of all of them. So, that takes time. The second piece is sometimes people are overwhelmed because they didn't know that these assets were coming their way. And they are ill prepared for the amount and responsibility that comes with it. So when there's outright distributions, we see that happen, and they are terrified in some cases because they've never had, maybe they made $50,000 or $100,000 a year and they're getting $5 million. They don't know what to do with it. They have a huge sense of responsibility to do the right things with it. They don't feel equipped with the knowledge on how to do it the way their parents did, or the right way to do it to preserve and protect the assets. And instead of it being a blessing, it becomes an obligation and a curse. So being able to have these assets in trust for the benefit of their kids with a support team like a trustee and or a really strong investment advisor has a ton of emotional support and financial support for that next generation.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have had this conversation recently where mom and dad feel so good about the ability to pass on a lot of money, and yet they don't recognize the responsibility and sometimes negativity that comes with that once someone gets it. So I do think that happens more often than people want to admit. One other thing I want to bring up with that, though, that if you could expand on too, is sometimes we run into scenarios where after mom and dad die, we find out that the estate plan was never funded correctly. Beneficiaries weren't done correctly. Talk about that part of it, because that's the part that lawyers don't talk about enough. They draft the documents, but they don't always do the follow-up needed.
Yeah, I think you said this early on. I think both your business as an investment advisor and financial planner, as well as our business as trustees, we see a lot of what happens after the fact. And we see some of the messes that have to be cleaned up. So one thing I think is the worst, the one thing that really frustrates people the most is when a beneficiary doesn't get changed on an IRA. Right. So you have a trust document, but the IRA falls outside of the trust document. So we have seen this in a couple cases where husband and wife get divorced. The individual that we work with never changes the beneficiary and still has the divorced spouse on as beneficiary of $1 million IRA. And nobody's really happy about that.
No.
Kids are super frustrated. Surviving spouse, the second spouse, is really frustrated. A lot of disappointment there. The other thing is just in general, if you're not, when you set up a revocable trust, the revocable trust is a tool that allows you to have an orderly distribution of assets at death. That's really what it's intended to do, and to avoid probate. So what we see in a lot of cases is trusts are drafted really well. Sometimes real property are put into those trusts, but the brokerage account, the cabin or one of the houses don't make it into the account, and now you have a probate estate. So without a proper will to have a rollover will or a few of those other estate planning tools, you end up having a probate estate anyway, which becomes public record. It costs more money, and it takes a longer amount of time to settle the estate. So there's just inconveniences as well as some privacy issues that a lot of our clients aren't thrilled about when assets aren't properly titled.
And now you're talking about Michael Jackson and Prince and Elvis Presley and everyone that didn't do it correctly.
Yep. And I would say it's a great example. You've got some real genius people there, and our clients in a lot of ways are incredibly brilliant, genius people in the trade and the skill that they're in. That's why they have become so successful. But they really need our support to ensure that the I's are dotted and T's are crossed on the areas that they're not experts in. And they really rely on us and their team of financial advisors to ensure that those pieces are taken care of. And too often, unfortunately, we find that mistakes are made or things are missed, and it makes it more complicated than it needs to be.
Yep. Let's pivot a second. In my last podcast, I actually interviewed Blake about selling a business and stuff. And so often we see business owners, as they're thinking about selling a business, suddenly say, oh, and I don't have an estate plan. There are things that business owners could consider doing with an estate plan, whether it be charitable or other issues, prior to selling a business. Could you talk about that for a second? Because I view this as, when I say this episode is a little bit about what can go wrong, I view this as lost opportunity when I don't see it done right.
Yeah, I have a client right now that I'm working with. It's a great example of that. He has a successful business. He's continuing to see the assets grow and grow and grow. And we're doing some planning right now with him. He has no intentions of selling the business at this point, but the businesses are growing so fast that he's creating estate planning and estate tax issues. So we're doing some proactive things. In this case, we're looking at gifting some of these assets in kind, so the business asset into trust for his kids. And by doing that, there's some tax benefits. There's some strategies that we can talk about. One is the tax benefit is if you gift shares of a LLC, you can usually get a discount on the value of that asset for minority and lack of control. So if you gift, let's call it $1 million in business assets, with the discounts, you may only be using $800,000 of gifting power of your exemption amount to do that. The second piece is for a lot of our business owners, the biggest growth asset that they have is their business. So continuing to hold that asset until they pass can sometimes really create difficult estate planning and exemption issues for them. If we get some of that growth out of their estate earlier, it can create a lot more efficient transfer of tax options for them. So if we can get it out at $1 million value, discounted to $800,000 value versus seeing it grow for another 20 years and now become a $10 million asset, it changes the equation on what we're trying to accomplish. Now that $1 million asset that was transferred out is a $10 million asset, but it's an asset outside of his taxable estate. And it's an asset that the kids now have the ability to get benefit from. So there's a lot of different ways that we can look at that. The other one that comes to mind is just charitable planning, and you talked about that. So there's ways that prior to the actual the business being sold that we can look at some charitable donor advised funds. We can look at setting up charitable remainder trusts, charitable annuity trusts, some charitable trusts that can give a tax break that can benefit the business owner. Now, when I talk about charitable trusts, we talk about charitable trusts for clients who are charitably inclined. If our clients aren't charitably inclined, that's just not a great answer. So making sure that they understand what it is that makes sense for them and being able to offer those options is important.
So let me step back a second. You talk about strategy here. Let's talk tactics for just a second, because what I've seen is when someone passes, people just can't find stuff. Any tips or tricks on your end as to what families should be doing so that at the end of the day, everyone can find the right documents, find the right passwords, all the insurance contracts, deeds, anything they might need?
I do. I have a couple of suggestions. One is for the do-it-yourselfers, there are systems out there that you can use. Knockbox is one of them. It's N-O-X. What is it? How do you spell it? N-O-X-B-O-X. All it is a filing system. It can either be an electronic filing system or it can be a paper filing system. But it helps you think about what assets you have and organize them in a spot where your executor or your family members can find them efficiently. The other thing that we do when we work with our clients, we have clients where we're listed in a document at a future date. So it's a revocable trust. They are managing the revocable trust right now. They don't plan on passing assets until they pass away. At that point, they're asking a corporate trustee like us to step in, help settle the estate, and then distribute the assets. We do meetings every 3 to 5 years with these clients to identify a net worth statement, list where the assets are and estimated value, unique assets that require extra hand-holding or support. Business assets tend to be that way. In those cases, where are they? Who owns them? Do they have a succession plan? I mean, do they have a team that can take over, or is the business 100% dependent upon this business owner? And without this business owner, the value of the business is either materially impacted or worthless. So in cases of business transition, making sure that they have a plan for succession is really, really important. You can have a great estate plan, but if the majority of the value of the estate assets are the business, and the business has not a lot of value, if the primary owner isn't operating, or the relationships or the connections or all those things, then the value really goes down meaningfully. So there's a lot of things that we need to think about and look at that. The other part is there are some unique assets that we have to be understanding of. Some of our clients may have, call it cryptocurrency, call it gold coins, call it a painting that's worth $5 million. All of those take special care. And identifying where those are and being able to understand how to access those is really important. We hear stories in our industry when we go to conferences about estates that were settled, and in the wall of the utility room, not in a safe, just behind a wall, a sheetrock wall, there's $5 million worth of gold coins that nobody knows about, right? And the family thinks they know, and then the family assumes someone stole it, right? So when it comes into family dynamics, all of these things come into play. And the best thing to do is have someone that you can trust that can oversee and manage at a high level the moving parts of your estate. And sometimes it's a family member, sometimes it's a corporate trustee.
I don't know if this is still true with this next generation coming up, but generations older, let's say people now maybe 80 and older, when they've passed away, I've always told the family, check their Bible or other books in their library, because you'll probably find some cash. And I have had people come back and say they have found thousands or tens of thousands of dollars in cash, because that generation really believed in making sure there was cash laying around the house in case something dramatic happened, right? So to your point, people keep things hidden for whatever reason. And it's hard to get people talking about it, but people, families need to talk about this stuff earlier so they uncover it. So let me just round this out a little bit. What am I not asking you that you think is important people should understand about what goes wrong?
Well, one of the things that you'd asked are trends. And one thing I'm seeing with a lot of our clients now is they're continuing to hoard and accumulate assets when they need to start transferring and gifting these sooner during their lifetime. Let me give you a couple of examples. If you look at longevity and how long people are living, we have people living to age 95, and then their kids are 75, 75 or 80 years old when they inherit a bunch of money. At that point, they've already made it. They've already kind of had to figure out their financial future. And there isn't a whole lot of benefit that can be provided to someone who is in that camp. And it can actually create some really difficult estate planning issues and or elder abuse issues that we've seen as well. So what I'm seeing as a trend and what I'm communicating to some of our clients is, if you think your kids can be trusted with money, then let's start giving some annual exclusion gifting to them and see how they manage it. If you don't think they can be trusted with money, let's start funding trusts earlier and have a distribution provision that allows them to have access to this money earlier when they're struggling with paying college tuition for their kids, when they're struggling with saving for retirement, helping their kids buy their first home, a handful of things like that. I'm starting to see that become a bigger and bigger trend. And where I'm seeing it, again, is in clients who have discretionary income above and beyond what they need for their own retirement. But I do think that's a trend I'm seeing, and I do think it's a positive trend. If the goal is to help your kids, to be able to help your kids and educate them in a way that's consistent with what your goals and values are, there's no better time to do it when you're alive. Where I see the disconnect is parents in generation one give it to their kids, and then it isn't spent the way they want to, and then they get frustrated, right? Truth is, Maybe that's a good solution for a trust. Maybe that's a solution where you just got to let go. At the end of the day, if your plan is to give them the money anyway, you got to start trusting them at some point. And I think if the plan is to get them the money, I have seen it start to happen sooner, so that the generation one can see the benefit. They can see the college tuition paid for their grandkids. They can see, the benefits of traveling with their kids and being able to do things that their kids wouldn't otherwise afford, creating family memories together. And in some cases, they're just paying for that vacation on behalf of the family. That's great too. But spreading that money out a little bit earlier is what I'm starting to see as a trend. And I think it's a positive trend for families that have wealth above and beyond what they need over their lifetime.
Well, and it goes to the book Die with Zero. It's basically one of the things he writes about is kids need money from age 25 to 40, because that's when real life happens with kids and houses and job changes and whatever else. And so waiting to give people money in their 60s and 70s doesn't add a lot of value. And the thing that I always tell most of my clients too is, if you don't like what your kids are going to do with the money, then you should spend it more. You should fly first class, because your kids will fly first class. So why don't you enjoy it more? And that's hard on people.
Yeah.
So, well, listen, I want to thank you for coming on today. This has been great talking to you. Probably have you back to talk about some real fun topics here and there. But it's just fun catching up on what's going on in the world of the trust.
I appreciate your time. Glad to help out. And I think there's more to come, right? There's always new stories and new opportunities that come up. We can share how to improve this process for some of our clients and keep them in a good spot.
Well, thanks, Chad, for joining us today. And why don't you tell us where we can reach you if we have further questions?
Yeah, you can reach me at my email address, which is my first initial last name, CHALBUR, at cornerstonetrust.net. Or you can find our website on the web at www.cornerstonetrust.net.
All right. Thanks, Chad. And for anyone wanting to see more of what's going on here at BGM or listen to any of my other podcasts, feel free to check us out on bgm360.com. With that, thanks, Chad, for joining us, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks, John.